because the whole three of them were healing and very expensive resins. So, and if they're that wise, then they wouldn't be giving gold as a present, would they? So that's my little theory, is it never was frankincense, myrrh and gold. It was frankincense, myrrh and cannabis. Anyway, so that's just, something to start the day off with. So it has actually been demonised more than once in its history. We think that probably the church suppressed it again, and as you know, throughout history, a lot of the spiritual herbs that Michael was talking about were restricted to the use of shamans and things like that. But in the 19th century is when we first start to hear again about cannabis. And it was from doctors that went over to India, that were perhaps with the East India Company or, something like that, or perhaps the military. And it's from there that we start to get some articles that are talking about the uses of cannabis as a medicine. There's now I must admit, my memory's a little hazy. All the correct references are a Google click away. But for example, there was a guy who did a couple of articles on a baby with infantile seizures, which has a very, very poor prognosis, in fact, and still does today. And of a child that was completely cured of these seizures using a cannabis medicine. Apparently the child went to sleep for a fair while, and then when they woke up they were seizure-free. And as you know, you can't kill anyone with it, and that includes babies. And another was talking about the use of cannabis in migraine. And it has been part of the pharmacopoeia for several countries right up until the middle of the last century. And so, as Michael has alluded to as well, pain-killing drugs became very sought after. So we ended up having the opium wars in China. And, of course, the various sort of countries in South America. And it was the Mexicans, in fact, that introduced cannabis to the United States more than anywhere else. Like, obviously, it came from other places as well. And so when you look at the history of prohibition, in fact, you're looking at the history of prohibiting drugs that control pain. And so... And throughout time, and sort of if you look at the history, laws have just been passed through the first part of the 20th century. They tried alcohol prohibition. Well, that didn't work. I find it interesting that the most dangerous, the deadliest drug that does the most damage was the one that managed to beat prohibition. Like, always staggers me, that one, but anyway. And there were several things that, caused all natural medicine to go into the wilderness. And basically it was pharmaceutical companies. Pharmaceutical companies funded medical schools and only gave funds to those that practiced allopathic medicine, in other words, their pharmaceutic model. And then it became... financially better for the government to control these things with laws. And so that's what happened. So then you had the narcotics bills passed and all this sort of stuff. There's a lot of books about it, like sort of cannabis historians do exist, and I would Google all of it because it's a really interesting story. But the thing that triggered prohibition for cannabis was in fact the hemp industry. It wasn't the effect of any sort of drug. It was the fact that they mechanised the harvest of hemp. Hemp had fallen into disfavour as a crop at the end of the 19th century because the cotton gin was invented, and it made the processing of cotton much cheaper. So they started to convert a lot of their crops to cotton instead of hemp. And that was the status quo, and so people grew in power, sort of especially in the south of America, growing their cotton. And then in the 30s, of course, DuPont, with his petroleum company, invented nylons. And so we had cotton and nylons to be used as textiles. And hemp, of course, was a very important textile. But then in the late 20s, they mechanised the harvest of hemp, or in the 20s sometimes. And so it actually made a comeback. And there was even a story in Popular Mechanics which said it's the new billion-dollar crop is hemp. And but this didn't please DuPont and his cronies. It didn't please Hearst, who had, you know, forests of wood that he wanted to use to make paper out of, and he'd patented that process. So basically, it was a two-pronged attack on cannabis. On the one hand, you had DuPont and his cronies wanting to destroy the hemp industry in order to commit the planet to using fossil fuels and forests for paper and cotton for textiles as well as plastics. And then on the other side, you had the FBI guy, Anslinger, whose mother apparently was a morphine or laudanum addict or something like that. So he had this real horror of drugs. And he was the one that sort of did all the prohibition stuff for alcohol. And of course, when that failed, he was looking around for something else to direct his attention to. And he particularly hated Negroes and Mexicans. And so he'd heard about this drug over the border, this plant that they used to smoke, the Mexicans, and it had found its way to New Orleans and the musicians used to use it. And he decided that this was a good way to kill two birds with one stone. So destroy the hemp industry and make that lobby group happy, and to demonise a drug that would marginalise, disenfranchise and criminalise minority groups like Negroes and musicians. So he coined the word marijuana, and that's why you'll find that, you know, we tend to correct you. If anyone says marijuana, we say, no, it's cannabis. Because marijuana is in fact a made-up word. It doesn't even mean cannabis. It means dogweed or something in Spanish. It's, you know, and this was to serve a couple of purposes, but one of which was so that the average person did not realise that their harmless cannabis tincture that they had in their medicine cabinet was in fact this demon drug. And many did not even make that connection. And so that was one of the reasons why they had to coin another name for it. And we all know what happened from there. In 1937, it was made illegal. First they tried to just tax hemp, and that wasn't enough, so then they made it all illegal. And then, so things rocked along, and, you know, it sort of stayed as the underground for a while until, of course, the 1960s came along and 1970s, where the whole, you know, that whole culture changed. Like, our world really did change in the 60s and 70s, and part of that was recreational drugs. And, you know, cannabis was rediscovered, hallucinogens were rediscovered, and unfortunately, eventually, you know, drugs like heroin and cocaine also made their way. And pharmaceutics as well. We've never really been free of those. So it was basically then carried on by Richard Nixon, who in the early 70s began the war on drugs. And I think it's fair to say that the war on drugs has done far more damage than any of these drugs could ever have done on their own. And in fact, the war on drugs is what created the problem with drugs. I mean, just cannabis alone, if they didn't demonise it and have all these reefer madness things, the vast majority of people would never have even tried it as a recreational drug. You know, but it's nothing like telling a teenager they can't do something. So it's a very interesting thing that when you look at the history, the reefer madness and, you know, all this brainwashing that we've all received down through these generations, it's all based on lies, and it's done far more damage than if we just let it all stay legal. And so because of all these other agendas, we've been made to do without a medicine for over 70 years. And I said this yesterday and I'll say it again, that the drug paracetamol is, the mechanism of action is via the endocannabinoid system. And so all these years, we've been forced to give our children a drug that's, well, it's a poison actually, that's derived from coal tar. And that's what we've been giving our children instead of a harmless cannabis tincture. You know, it's little things like this that really start to make you think. You know, why were doctors not told that the endocannabinoid system exists? Now, how many of you know anything about the endocannabinoid system? Like, you've heard of it? Do you know a lot about it? Okay, so we might just do a little rundown on that. Would that be okay? Like, just go through the endocannabinoid system again? Okay, so I think you're aware that the body contains many systems. Many transmitter systems and many neurotransmitter systems. And that simply means that these neurotransmitters are chemicals that do things. And most of these systems work on a lock and key principle, so that the neurotransmitter is the key and the receptor on the cell membrane is the lock. So the neurotransmitter comes along, and if the key fits into the lock, it turns it and it makes something happen in the cell. And that is basically how neurotransmitter systems work. So I think you're all aware, people know about serotonin. You know, they talk about that one with depression. And we have dopamine, and that's our pleasure one. They talk about that with addiction, but also with psychiatric diseases like schizophrenia, where they have a deficiency of dopamine. We have adrenaline and noradrenaline, when most people sort of know what those ones are for, our fight and flight mechanism, and our stress response. And cortisol can act the same way, though it acts from the adrenal glands. We've got the endorphin system, and that, of course, contains our natural narcotics. So endorphins are the body's natural opium or opioids. We've got the GABA system, and this is what we call an inhibitory system. So if it becomes activated, it stops something. And that's the one, for example, that benzodiazepines work upon. So that's why those GABA drugs are sedatives and anti-epileptics and things like that, because they act to quieten things down. So the GABA system is also a really important neurotransmitter system, and many pharmaceutic drugs work on that system, including the anti-epileptic drugs and the sedatives like the benzodiazepines. Okay, so in the 1980s, it came about, you know, they were researching, they'd found THC and they'd found CBD, and they had found receptors on the cells that these would fit into. But it took them a little longer to find the natural endocannabinoids that are found in the body. And the main ones, there's probably more, but the main two so far are anandamide and 2-AG. And then, so that actually then led them to realise that this, in fact, was a whole new neurotransmitter system. You know, we already knew about all those other ones I've just mentioned to you. And this is what they didn't consider was important enough to tell doctors about. And what was even more important is that it became really obvious that this was a regulatory system, that this was a system that fine-tuned all the other systems. I like to liken it a bit like a graphic equaliser on a stereo, where everyone's got their neurotransmitter profile, and what the endocannabinoid system does is just try and gently edge them all back towards the centre a little, so that everything's really well balanced. And so that is, that's the main way that it works. And so it can both activate and inhibit. And this indeed is a quality of this system that can actually make it a little difficult to work with. And it also is part of the reason why it gets so individualised. The cannabis medicine is a very individualised treatment. Yes, so, and it's also interesting is that it took them a long time to find the natural endocannabinoids, because they found out, because they're only very short-lived in the body. They are produced in response to the things going down, the signals going down the nerves, And it's a really interesting thing that they do, that not very many things in the body do this. It's called retrograde transmission. So the signal comes to the end of the nerve and it jumps over the junction to the other one, and then it triggers off something in that cell, and then the endocannabinoid system says, hey, hang on, there's too much of that. So it sends the anandamide or 2-AG back across the little junction thing to regulate at the other side, and that's really unusual. And and if you think about it, it's the common sense way of fine tuning, where it's a response that happens instantly. And so, we think that's probably why, part of the reason why nature designed the cannabinoids to be so fat soluble, so that they're stored in body tissues, because it allows for that very tiny amount of release of stored cannabinoids that you've taken, so that they can continue their work. Because that's how it sort of works in the body as well. And so that's why it took them so long to find the natural endocannabinoids, is because they were so short-lived in the body. And so actually I'll stop there because it gets very complicated. Has anyone got any questions just about that? I can't have done that good a job at explaining it. Yeah.
So I've made an inquiry, with trying to get things prescribed, and they're sort of saying the regulatory measures aren't quite new enough, so that's the laurels that they're resting on. So with this being such an intricate process, and they're saying each batch is not similar.
Oh, okay. So I suppose we're talking about we're talking about like the consistency of medicines. Like when we're talking about the endocannabinoid system, we're talking about a natural system, and we're talking about the things that the body produces. Yes. Yeah, because everybody is different. In fact, all drugs should be prescribed on an individual basis. It is an absolute lie to say one size fits all with anything. It just so happens that with a lot of pharmaceutics, it doesn't matter so much if you go a bit much either way with dosage or whatever. But technically, all drugs should be individualised to the person. And in paediatrics, they are in a way, because at least they do it by weight. But I mean, we get the same dose of antibiotics whether you weigh 50 kilos or 120 kilos. So yeah, and so when it comes to cannabis medicine though, you just can't do it that way because you don't get the same results. It's never a magic bullet. All herbal medicine is not a magic bullet. All herbal medicine takes commitment, and it takes a holistic approach. And that's why, a good cannabis clinician will not just hand you a prescription for your cannabis. They will look at your whole person, and they will do a naturopathic assessment on you, because doctors don't know how to do naturopathic assessments, unfortunately. That's something really useful that I've learned in my herbal medicine degree. For a start, because it takes so long, and as you know, you're out the door in 15 minutes in your doctor's surgery. So it's been a really fascinating lesson to learn as a doctor, is to learn, how to completely individualise my approach to patients. And that has to be done if you want to succeed with cannabis medicine. And also it's a thing to remember that because it's a regulatory system, you can get unexpected results. And I think you're all aware that we totally believe that it must be the whole plant that is used, that isolates will not be as successful. As soon as you isolate a molecule from a plant, you basically fuck it. And that's what's happened with most of our drugs. As soon as you isolate it, you create adverse effects that weren't there before. And so the same thing will happen if we do that with cannabis. So synthetics and isolates will not give you the results. You may get some people that respond okay, but that's because cannabis is also a very forgiving medicine, and 3/4 of the people will get some benefit from it anyway, no matter what they use. But it's the other quarter that's really important, and it's those with chronic conditions and those with multiple conditions and complicated conditions that I think do require some sort of guidance either from a doctor or a naturopath or someone who who knows their cannabis medicine. Any more questions about that? Because that's a bit of an airy-fairy area. Yep.
Is this being recorded? Can we listen to it?
Yeah, I think it's you. Oh, not today.
Everything's been recorded. You can search on YouTube, Nimbin Medican, and you'll find hundreds of...
Yep, there'll be hundreds there.
Going back years. Okay.
So any other questions just about... So the main reason, of course, for individualised medicine is that everybody's response to cannabis is different. And that's the way it's designed to be. And so when you're given a cannabis medicine, what you will see on the bottle is that it will have how many milligrams of THC or CBD per mil. And that's how you work it out. But of course, that's not all that's in there. You know, if it's a whole plant product, it can have over 140 different cannabinoids in it. But the plant also contains things other than just cannabinoids. So anybody else know what else are in cannabis plants? Terpenes. Anything else? Flavonoids, lipids, waxes, cellulose, chlorophyll. And, you know, all of those things have their uses. Must admit the lipids and the waxes are a pain. But apart from that, everything else has its use, even chlorophyll. The presence of chlorophyll in your extracted medicine can make it very hard to judge how much is in there, but it's not a bad thing to have it in there. You can get chlorophyll supplements. So, yes.
Aren't most of the waxes taken away once that...
Yeah, that's right. That's the things that you'd like to be left behind when you're extracting, yes. But the vast majority of everything else is fine. Now, something I've noticed about terpenes, and John Tay actually will probably talk a bit about this, beta-carotene, for example, is a terpene that will interact with the cannabinoid receptor. And so it is very helpful to have certain terpenes with cannabis because they work together. And nature has provided for that, because within the plant, it also has a terpene profile. And it's the terpenes that give it the smell and the taste and that sort of thing. And you get terpenes have medical uses as well. The medical uses, like terpenes to use as a medicine, is not practical, really. You're better off just getting your terpenes like in foodstuffs, and in aromatherapy is a good way of getting terpenes, you know, using it as an aromatherapy thing. And of course the terpenes that are contained in cannabis, because terpenes actually work best when they work in with other phytochemicals. So the best medical results you'll get from terpenes is within a whole plant situation, like in the cannabis plant. So that's an interesting little side thing. There's also flavonoids, which would basically, that's often what gives plants their colour. So as you can imagine, there's not a great deal. I mean, like calendulas with their bright yellow colour obviously have a lot more flavonoids in them. Mind you, calendulas are resin too, which is interesting. You wouldn't think that beautiful flower, if you pick a calendula flower and feel how sticky it is, that's resin, just like on the cannabis plant. But anyway, so the flavonoids are not a major part of the cannabis plant, but they still add to its antioxidant activity, because flavonoids are excellent antioxidants. And so that's why when you're looking at holistic cannabis treatment, you start with eating it. And do you know much about cannabis as food? Yeah, so this is where, I'll just reiterate this because people do get very confused. If we're talking about food or industrial, we say hemp. If we're talking about recreational medicinal, we say cannabis. And that's the easiest distinction to make so that you don't get confused. Because hemp oil is not cannabis oil. Hemp oil is hemp seed oil. And so what's contained in hemp seed oil is the same ratio of omega-3 and 6 as what's found in your cell membranes in your body. So if you want to get the best out of your cannabis treatment, you need to make sure that your endocannabinoid system is activated, and you do that, the simplest way is by eating it. So have the oil, have hemp seed oil in things. It doesn't like to be heated, so you have to sort of have it raw, but you can put it in salad dressings. You can put a bit of it in a smoothie. It just depends on how much you like the taste. The other product that you've heard of is whole hemp, which is basically the seeds that are cracked open. Now, the amazing thing about the hemp seed, the whole hemp, is that it contains a complete protein. Now, I'm not sure the vegans in the audience would probably be aware of the importance of complete proteins. They're the proteins that contain all the essential amino acids that the body uses to build proteins. They're the building blocks for proteins. And they're called essential amino acids because they're essential for, and basically there's some that the body cannot produce themselves. So we must eat those amino acids, which is a very simple thing to do, especially if you eat meat, because you'll get lots of all different amino acids when you eat meat. But if you're a vegetarian or vegan, it can be a problem to get enough complete protein. So there's a few foods that contain or pretty much all the essential amino acids. So that means you can replace that with meat. And that's eggs. If you're not vegan, if you're just vegetarian, eggs are a complete protein. Soy is a complete protein, but it may have other problems because of its phytoestrogen activity in especially menopausal women and those who've had breast cancer. Quinoa is a complete protein, and of course that's become a very popular seed now to eat. And hemp seed is a complete protein. So not only has it got exactly what we need for it to keep our cell membranes healthy, but it's a food that can replace meat if you want it to. And then along with that, which is very difficult to do at the moment, is juicing. Some people use juicing cannabis as their only treatment for whatever ails them, and it works for them. So that's not a medicine, that's not smoking it or vaping it or ingesting it as an extract. Some people get good results just by juicing. So, it's highly recommended that if you can get enough plant to juice, then juice it and eat the plant. And that's what they're offering out there in the little shots with apple and blackcurrant, which is really tasty, actually. I had too. And that's the other thing, and that is what will prepare your body for your cannabis medicine to work the best. And as an aside, it will just make you really healthy anyway. And so when you're approaching especially chronic conditions, you must have a holistic approach. And I think Dr. Tay will talk more about this as well. So you don't just hand over the medicine and say, there you go. You have a look at how healthy their endocannabinoid system is, how much they're being exposed to pesticides and stuff in the foods they eat. Gently encouraging people to return to a whole food diet and to consider food as medicine, which it is. And then the whole point would ultimately be to reduce pharmaceutics that people are on. That's not something that is done immediately, and I think that anybody who just whips people off their drugs and says, here, take cannabis, they're completely irresponsible and unethical. And that's why we advocate, start low, go slow. Because we don't want adverse effects, and you can get adverse effects from potent extracts. It is a medicine. So basically, if we want cannabis medicine to succeed, then we have to use natural medicine as well. It all works in together. And then hopefully we can start to decrease how many pharmaceutics that we use, and hopefully eventually organic food will become cheaper and more readily available. But meanwhile, you can always grow your own in every aspect. Grow it all. You know, because that's probably the best way. If you can grow your own veggies, grow your own herbs, grow your own cannabis, if you can do it, do it. So now, any further questions? So I think that's probably about it. My little inbuilt timer is saying that time must be almost up. So any more questions? I don't believe this. There's got to be one question.
Where's your practice?
Okay, look, unfortunately, I'm a non-registered doctor. I had a few pretty horrible things happen to me several years ago, one of which was my enemies in my hometown of Gundawindi decided they didn't want a competitor to their only practice in town. So I was notified to APRA and spent 5 years fighting the medical board, the upshot of which is that I was deregistered for 1 week. So I can reapply to be registered, but I'm now very much a marked doctor. So if I attempted to apply for registration, the conditions they would place on me would be so onerous as to not make life worth living. So, and besides, I have really no desire to be part of such a corrupt and profiteering profession as medicine has become in Australia. And certainly while the narcissistic sociopaths that are running medicine in Australia are still there. Until we start to get a few integrative doctors into the higher positions, natural medicine will be targeted by medical boards. And that's the truth. That's, you know, this is part of the reason why doctors are so scared to prescribe cannabis. Even though it's now legal for them to do it and blah, 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 the very fact that they're interested in it and they've applied to, you know, to prescribe it and stuff marks them. They're no longer flying under the radar. The integrative GPs in Australia have to fly under the radar. And if people are notified to a medical board, if it's a malicious notification, they are completely protected under law. So if someone is notified maliciously, you can never get the malicious notifier. Legally, civilly, criminally, anyway, totally protected. So once someone reports you to the medical board, you are basically guilty. You're never proven innocent. So basically you're punished before you've even had a hearing or anything like that. And so that's, you need to understand that that's how bad the system is for doctors, and that is why so many doctors are so scared of prescribing cannabis. Yep.
Exactly why my doctor won't do it.
Yeah, I know, and you know, you can really understand it. I mean, many doctors have suicided because of what APRA and the medical board have put them through. I'm just not the suicide type. And besides, I contracted end-stage melanoma halfway through that, so I was busy fighting for my life after that. So that battle sort of went to the background a bit. But yeah, so, and that's part of the reason how I ended up in this space too. Yeah, so...
It's on board, but won't.
Yeah, but I know. And also medical indemnity. A lot of the medical indemnity companies are hooing and hawing and about, you know, whether they will indemnify doctors for prescribing cannabis, and that's another big one too. So there's all of that. Well, I've got me wind up.
You're coming back to do the
Yes,
trivia
I'll come
quiz.
back and do the trivia quiz a bit later, so that's usually a bit of fun, quite informal. And if any of you come back to listen to the trivia quiz, I'll be asking questions about what we've talked about.
And also she will be outside and hanging
outside.
around. And
Hanging around.
one of the best things about here today is if you really do want to talk to someone on their own, you'll catch them outside.
You catch him outside.
Andrew Catalaris or Deb or Dr. John Tay. Is he here now? Are you here now?
He must be nearly due to be on, isn't he?
No, Carol is on now.
Oh,
So
hi,
really-
Carol, I've got to say this. Carol is, like, I always have to laugh because it was the first time we never met, wasn't it, Carol? We shared a room and never saw one another the whole time we were there. So we always joke about it was the first time we never met. So we did catch up after that. Yeah.
Here's Dr. John. But you're not on, so you don't have to rush. He's cool.
Yeah, we're just calling attention to you, John, as you're passing through the room. That's Dr. John.
And so he's from Plant Med in Brisbane, and we'll be talking after Carol's coming up now. So really appreciate that Carol Island came up for the weekend. And